The rationale is, years ago, there were districts that would use title money to pay for the positions that should have originally been paid out of your local tax base, out of 199, what we call 199. That's just a budget code. So some districts got in trouble because, in other words, everybody has an assistant principal, but the schools that have economically disadvantaged, that are labeled Title I, well, let's pay for those assistant principals with federal dollars. Well, you can't do that. If you're using local tax money to pay for assistant principals in any of your schools, that's considered a basic. You have to provide that across the board. You can't, that's when you hear people say you can't supplant, you can't replace, you have to supplement. It has to be over and above. So if, for instance, you have a campus, I'll give you this one last example. If we have a high school campus, and according to our guidelines, they should have 4 assistant principals, and then we have another high school, and they are a Title I school, and they should have 2 assistant principals by our guidelines. If they want to use title money to give a third, they absolutely can, because now that is above and beyond. But they can't use the title money to supplant, to do one of those 2 that they qualify under the same guidelines. So why is that important? Well, no, we haven't had any issues in recent years with comparability. That's absolutely true, but it's a random sample. So in other words, I never know which schools they're going to compare, but they're going to compare more affluent schools with those that are very highly economically disadvantaged. And we've come pretty close, but we've met the comparability. But if we don't, we won't find out. They don't do the comparability reports until October, after our PEMS numbers are run. So that would mean that we wouldn't be notified until after the school year has been completed, and then I would have to return dollars. That would be a really big deal. If we had to return dollars. So of course I am concerned. I'm concerned about our budget. I'm concerned about us not paying for positions that we need. And I'm concerned that we also utilize the same consistent, when we say kids need something additional, what is that additional that they need, so that we can have the same definition, so that I can make sure that we're providing those funds across the board, or those resources across the board. And then lastly, I think, in looking at some of the emails that I'm trying to remember, someone accurately, stated, well, you're spending $7,000, the district spends $7,000 and somewhat at one of our more affluent schools, let's say Cassis is the example, and the district average is $14,000 per student. That's absolutely a fact. But an average, as many of you I'm sure know, can be skewed. So for instance, Rosedale, where we have our medically fragile children, well, we're spending like $60,000 a child there because they have different needs. The Alternative Learning Center, we spend like $25,000 a child because it's a lower student to teacher ratio. We have police officers. I mean, I think you can see why the costs are different. Now, when you compare a school to a similar size school, which is really hard to do, because as you all know, West Austin schools, they're very fully populated, and in East Austin, we have enrollment challenges. So it's hard to find schools that actually are pretty close in number. But when you look at one like, I think maybe it's Padron that we used, and you look at Padron and you look at Cassis, and you go and look at the actual sheet, which is all publicly available, and we'll be happy to send you all the links so that you don't have to take my word for it. And if what you do is simply pull out like special ed resources, bilingual resources, and just compare the gen ed funds to the gen ed funds, you actually don't have a couple $100 difference per child between, let's say, Cassis and Padron. Now, that's not true in every case. When you have lower enrollment, you also have the problem of not having economies of scale, right? So at schools where we have 22 at an elementary per classroom, that teacher, you're going to take that salary and divide it amongst 22 kids if you're doing a per student count. Well, if you only have 18 students or 13 because you've got bilingual, let's say in some of our economically disadvantaged campuses where you have gen ed, you may have ESL, is languages other than Spanish, and then you have your regular gen ed. What happens in one whole grade level is you might have 12 students that in first grade bilingual, you may have 14 students that need first grade general education, and then you may have 9 students that need ESL. Those are all different certifications. So you can see that the price per child is absolutely going to be more because I don't have 22 students in each of those classrooms. So there's truth to all of that, and I totally get how that kind of makes the whole equity conversation very challenging. So our only intent here was to pick up costs that our PTAs should not be, this is not, like we should not be putting up, I'm well aware that it's not in line with, the national or the state PTA guidelines. They really prefer that PTAs not fund positions because it can put a school in a situation where we're like, oh, well, they're going to fund it, so you know what, we're not going to fund it. So I think it's kind of in that regard, it becomes something that you all are working very hard to try to help the school, and we need to work with you to try to figure out how do we get all our kids everything that they need and not have it be one community and another community not, or have one community feeling like they're being blamed for something. That was never, ever the intent whatsoever. If anything, I thank you all for all of the work that you all have done for years and years and years at many of our schools. And so with that, I think I'll just close by saying, I think there may be a lot of disagreement around my process, around how we arrived at it. I don't think there's any disagreement that we want every single kid to have what they need. And as for our employees, we have plenty of positions open. I can't guarantee that it would be at that school. Nobody can be guaranteed that it would be at a particular school because we're student-centered. So we have to make sure that our resources are distributed based on student need. Now, if they're at a school and someone actually resigns or retires from that school, could that person, go back to that campus? Absolutely, if that presented itself. But I want to manage expectations. And as much as I would like to, just like, well, let me just say everything, let me just do everything so that everybody will be happy. I'm not always going to be able to do that. And so I'm working to try to put myself in your all's shoes. Yes, my son's 28 years old, but I was a PTA mom, and I don't think I donated any of the hours you all did, but I certainly donated to the wrapping paper and the candy sales and whatever else he brought home. And so we're indebted to you for all that you all have done for our schools for years and years and years. And, I would like an opportunity for us to just, kind of listen to what your questions are, and then we can work together to ensure that we're doing everything we can for our students, regardless of where they are. Student needs are student needs, regardless of their economic background. And so I want to be able to address all of those things. So I'll stop talking now so you all can ask us questions. Yes, ma'am.
Can I ask a question about the comparability reports?
Mm-hmm.
I just have a general knowledge about Title I funding, but in everything that I have read for the federal and the state, I couldn't find anything about that. Could you just explain a little bit more about how it affects our federal funding?
Yeah, so again, if we are spending equal amounts of money at, and you actually have choices. They'll let you, because you can run a comparability. They'll tell you run it on these schools. First, you can do dollar amounts and see if you meet comparability. If it doesn't, you can do FTEs or full-time equivalent positions, because salaries have a lot to do with dollar amounts, right? So like one school may be spending more than the other, but it doesn't mean it's not comparable, because those teachers, let's say at some schools, may be far more experienced, and their salaries may be higher than, let's say, we tend to have less experienced teachers, for instance, at economically disadvantaged schools. So that in and of itself could show like, oh my gosh, this district is spending more at school A than they are at school B. But then if you go to what we'll call FTEs or full-time equivalents, you count up the positions, and we would be able to show that no, we weren't, because they give you options so that you don't lock yourself in. But at the end of the day, if a comparability report is run and we don't show the differential that we're actually investing dollars more where students are of poverty, then you risk losing the 25 or 26 million that we get from the federal government. And that's an annual, in general, that's an annual amount we get. It can go up, it can go down based on the biennium. So we usually know how much we're gonna get for 2 years. So they'll tell us you're gonna get 25 in year 1, you're gonna get 26 in year 2. And then you get to roll over funds that are left over 1 year. The second year, if you still have funds, you're not able to roll it over. But I know that we can get George to actually give you a link so that you all can see what I'm talking about with regard to comparability.
Sure, that would be great. So just to clarify, you're saying that the district has to submit these reports, the comparability reports, every year
Yes.
in order to qualify for the federal funding?
Well, and not in order to qualify, in order for you to be able to keep it. So they're going to distribute the money. They look at us, they look at what percent we have economically disadvantaged district-wide, and then they give you a lump sum. And then you choose, utilizing their different tiers, how we want to distribute those funds. During the year, then they run comparability. You run it every single year. And if we don't meet that comparability, it could be possible that we would be asked to return some, all, none. It would depend on what the differential is. But anytime we're injecting more local dollars compared to the federal dollars at schools that are not economically disadvantaged, it has somewhat of a risk to what our overall comparability could be. And the overall number of positions, if I were to take all of the partials, all of these positions add up to, of the ones that we know, because we also didn't have, the principal would tell us, this is how many positions are being paid out of PTA. Then we went to our finance, and out of the accounts that we've set up for PTA under local dollars, those did not match what our principals had. So we had to spend some time trying to understand what the reality actually was. But after we looked at those, the total number of full-time equivalents out of our 5,400 teaching positions is 17.2 full-time equivalents. And it's 27 different people out of those positions because many of them are partials, not a full position.
Is this something that's been in place every year, these reports? And it's just, because I know, we've addressed that at our school, I know we've been doing this for at least 20 years, and this is the first we've heard of it. So it's just, it's a little bit.
Comparability has, I don't know, 20 years. I couldn't speak to that. I don't know how long Austin ISD that we've qualified for that amount of federal funds because our economically disadvantaged has gone up and down over the last 2 decades. So I really couldn't speak to how long, but it's been years. I mean, I'm not going to say this is something new. It's not something new. It's that when you have a reduction in enrollment, but not a reduction in economically disadvantaged, a few positions can put us in a situation where, we could end up where I'm not able to demonstrate that we're spending more in economically disadvantaged schools. And again, they don't do a district like ours, they don't do every single school. They do a random sampling of campuses. And so, that's why I wanted to be completely clear. We have met the comparability in the past. But I've also been in a situation where we didn't, and we ended up with a Title I monitor for 10 years. And when you have a Title I monitor in your district, it's like having OCR in your district. They are going to pay attention to every single nickel and dime, and we can't spend anything without the monitor's permission. So is that like an extreme example? I'm sure that it is. But having lived through that, I'm sure you can understand where that kind of, I've already been through that, and it's a very challenging situation. And I'm also not wanting to necessarily put this out as a communication, because I also don't want anybody to suddenly come audit what we've done, because I don't know how, I don't know how we've met comparability. I don't know how we've met it. because we do have some campuses that we have some huge disparities. And the only way is for me to be honest with y'all. I'm very concerned that it could happen. And so I totally get well, how come this is something coming up now? I think it's exacerbated by the fact that we've lost enrollment, but we're very likely going to we could even have an increase in percentage, not kids, but percentage of economically disadvantaged in our campuses. And so I'm really just wanting to try to be proactive and not end up in that situation where we would either be having an audit or where they would actually, worst case scenario, they would take the 25 million. I would already have that in people. So, and they have contracts, so we'd have to dip into the fund balance, which would leave us below the 20% policy requirement. We're about to go out and sell some more bonds off of the 2017 bond program, because we don't borrow it all at once. You only borrow what you're going to build, so you don't pay interest. We're not going to build all of the $1 billion at one time. So it's a little more complex, I think, than just, this never started as anything about the PTA. It just never started that way. It was strictly about working to ensure, when we were discovering that there wasn't any we couldn't see the application of the current guidelines and staffing, and then it's like, well, let's dig a little more and how can we get this right-sized so that we can end up in a situation where we don't put ourselves at risk in any way.
So this really all came into focus because the lack of enrollment from this past year, from the chaotic school year, that just shone a spotlight on this?
Well, I would say it was a major factor, but there were so many factors. The one that we've been borrowing against our fund balance for more than 5 years, and we have, there's no way to replenish. The only way you replenish your fund balance is you have to spend less than what you take in. And so I'm not doing a good enough job of saying, like our own budgets, if you make $60,000 a year and you spend $70,000, that's not going to work for a very long period of time. And right now, our budget that we're even submitting right now, so that I wouldn't have to cut positions or cut people, we cut vacancies wherever possible as opposed to people. We're still in, and I saw our acting CFO just walked in. George, is it a $38 million deficit?
Yep.
So that means we're spending currently, the proposed budget is $38 million more than the revenue that we're generating. And that's on us. That's about position control. It's about ensuring that we don't have positions that, central office, we have too many in central office. It's not just at a campus level. But again, on paper, I can we need to cut this, and we need to do this, and we need to do this. All of those are people. 86% of our budget is in people. Somebody will know somebody in each of those departments. So from an objective standpoint, it's very easy to, we need to cut this, we need to cut this, and we need to cut this. But those are people. And so I don't think this is something that we can correct overnight. And the enrollment had an impact because it makes it even harder. When you have less students, you're going to generate less dollars. And so I have the same amount of people, but I'm putting even less money in. How do you sustain that over time? So yes, it had an impact, but it's more than just that.
Any thoughts on the whole, everybody's kind of, I'm sure, feels the same way, how to kind of reconcile feelings about the increases in property taxes and everyone is paying and the whole state recapture program, and any thoughts on how we can help kind of create some progress there?
Yeah.
Or, coming from personal experience, our school's kind of, built in 1956 and pretty much looks exactly the same way. Mm-hmm. So, I know that there's bonds and plans in place for that, but I just know the community of Austin, we all want every child to have the best possible experience and opportunity in education. And I'm just kind of thinking like, as a community as a whole, how that, the best way to approach that.
And I think we heard that same kind of comment or question this morning from Zoom, and people saying, can we get together, can we start talking about this? So my dissertation is on recapture, okay? And so on theory, it's like what I was describing about positions. In theory, if you look at it, it says every child, from a simplistic standpoint, every child in Texas should be worth the same educational dollars, whether they live in rural Texas, let's say Roscoe ISD, where there's 250 kids and it's all farming land, and they don't have any way to generate property taxes, right? Or whether you're in a Houston or a Dallas or an Austin where you have malls or you have businesses that you can generate. And then, of course, Austin, though, our property values, and speaking from my own personal experience, I've lived in San Antonio, I've lived in Dallas, and then obviously I live here now, and I'm like, oh my word, I don't know how you all have managed what you're dealing with. Now I feel it, and I don't feel it the way you all have felt it for years. Nonetheless, the idea was, if all of this money, the state of Texas is responsible for public education. So if all the dollars come in, we should not think of, in theory, we should not think of the dollars as their Austin ISD dollars. They're the state of Texas dollars, and they're supposed to be redistributed to meet the needs of all kids throughout the state. The biggest fallacy is those dollars don't go to schools. The taxes that we're paying, we do not utilize those in the state of Texas for funding schools, only a portion. The rest goes into the governor's or the state of Texas general operating budget, and they use it for other things. And so, honestly, I'm wondering, as I've done my dissertation and when I worked on my thesis in my master's program, I'm waiting for MALDIF or someone to file another lawsuit against the state, because to me it's a misrepresentation. We're all paying that. These are school taxes. And I've heard many people tell me, in San Antonio, folks that lived in let's say Alamo Heights, or in Dallas that lived in Highland Park, and they're like, we don't mind. We get that the money belongs to every kid. The problem is, where are our dollars going? Can the state show us? And they can't, because they don't use 100% of our dollars that say they're schools. They're not. And Texas does rank, depending on the year, we're 47th, 48th, or 49th in school funding. So our state, for as much as production that we are in terms of the GDP, we come in very low in terms of just, because the truth is, what is the real crux of this? The real crux is they don't fund our schools well in Texas.
Right.
They don't. And I do think there's some things we can do, and I think the only people, in my opinion, that have the will are Austinites, because you all deal, I'm learning it, but you all deal with the legislature, and sometimes people create things just because they're mad at Austin. People told me that. I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm like, oh, okay, now I see it. I would love for us to work with you and create a committee, a group of folks that we can bring in, people that are like really knowledgeable, and how do we start to work together to try to get this fixed. It isn't going to happen. Nobody's going to do it by themselves. The state isn't going to say, you know what, we're wrong. We need to give you all more money. Republican or Democrat, I think this is a nonpartisan issue. It's not like I can say, if there was a different party as governor, that we would have more money, because that's not true either. So I think we could all agree this isn't a partisan issue. This is just an issue of putting schools as important as they really are. And we'd love to be able to do that.
I just say that we would love to collaborate on all levels to kind of lift everybody up, right? That's what we're wholeheartedly believe in, is lifting every child up in Texas and getting their funding where it needs to go. And I think that's why all the PTAs have, felt like they took it upon themselves to get what needed to get done, at the schools. And so just know that this is we have wholehearted open communication with you in order to help support that. Yeah.
Just to piggyback on that, with all due respect, I appreciate your apology about the lack of communication, but I know that our PTA has reached out multiple times to try to have a conversation prior to losing our teachers, just to try to work collaboratively with, all of the PTAs and the district. And I don't know if you know that enrollment at Cassis is down 22%, and now, families who want to give to public education are very, very upset, and that's all we want to do. And I mean, we've sent multiple emails about, first it was a narrative on equity, and now it's this narrative on the Title I funding, and I think we're all just feeling like we've been left in the dark.
Well, the Title I to me is equity. I mean, because it is equity that allows us to be able to have Title I dollars. If we don't have equity in the distribution, then we wouldn't be able to keep the Title I dollars. So I think that the real, when we talked about equity from the beginning, I'm just going to go back to the example of this all started because there was no actual alignment of the guidelines of staffing that were in place, and us being able to connect that with individual campuses. And from the 17.2 FTEs, there are going to be several of those that the district is going to pick up, which doesn't even include the ones that we added, like the assistant principal positions. So I certainly, again, working to put myself in your shoes, I get it. There was no, just like there's no intent from any PTA to do anything that would harm anybody, there was no intent on my part to upset anyone. I mean, that's the last thing. I'm not trying to upset anybody. I would love everybody to be able to see it from all perspectives and then us work together. And I recognize, like I said, there isn't any part of me that doesn't want to, like, can I just go back in time and can I do it again? But I also don't, it's a balance. It's a balance between being able to say, you know what, I messed up, and there was no intent to do so, and how we can work together to make sure that, we're meeting our student needs. I think that's the area in which I want to be able to move forward in. But I also understand that if people, need to say some things to feel better, and that I'm clear on how upset I made someone, I get it. I get it, and I'm okay with that too. I did mess up, but again, the intent was, I didn't even know PT. I did not know until March 11th, when Trustee Foster at a board meeting said, what about positions that are not being funded, that are being funded by other entities? He didn't say PTA, he said by other entities. If that's going to create inequities, what are we going to do about that? And so then we went back and started looking, what are we talking about? And then what's PTA has fund, is that the only one? Nope, not the only ones. We got booster clubs. There's nonprofits. There's a whole series of situations that we're going to have to look one at a time. And so, again, I'm not going to disagree with any of you that would say, well, it could have been handled like this better. It could have been. I'm going to agree with you. And I also still feel like we need to be able to move forward in the way in which we can get past this, and we're working with each individual campus principal, and we'll continue to communicate. I think that's something, to your point as well, we need to be able to have something that says, at this school, here's what was being funded and here's what the district is picking up, so that it would be very, very clear to see. And I know that Leslie's still in the middle of working with principals and doing that. But I think, do you have an ETA of when you think those would be finalized? I know y'all were meeting with principals.
Yeah, it is part of it matching up. We're now going to payroll to try to figure out exactly which ones came out of what fund. But we should be able to match it up. I would say, probably by the end of this week, we should have a good idea.
So we can manage expectations, like early next Monday or Tuesday, we'd be able to share with everybody, here's what we discovered in terms of what our accounting is telling us were positions being paid out of PTA, and here's what the district is going to pick up. And then we can continue to have conversations from there. I'm sorry, you had a hand.
Well, my first question was, if these comparability reports have been happening for so long, how is this the first time that it was actually brought to attention that there was a deficit between how many employees we have at each campus and where that money is coming from? How is it not, I didn't just newbie question, like how is that not brought up before, if these comparability reports have been happening for so long? I think that would be, the numbers would pop up and there would be an inequity in funds distributing and, salaries paid and how many salaries are in each school. To me, it feels like it would have come up before.
So again, not every single school is looked at, and a lot of that has to do also with, so there were two different things, because you talked about the Title I comparability report and equity. So the whole equity piece from the beginning just was about equity from the standpoint of size of school. Is every campus getting, that's like what we'll call phase one of staffing. Regardless of what background, doesn't matter. Here's your school size, you should be able to get this, how many counselors, how many APs, how many teachers, and so on. So when we started to be able to staff for this next year is when it was discovered, because like a school's like, well, we're gonna lose like 11 positions. And it's like, well, how is this school losing 11? And then we had another school that needed to gain 6. So why that didn't come up before, I don't know. I wasn't here. And I'm also very leery of throwing anybody under the bus. All I can tell you is I'll be happy to show you everything that we have so that you can see we've got a spreadsheet that shows like this school is this size and has this many campus personnel. And according to the guideline, they should have had this. And so I think we can provide that, and I hope that would help. Does that answer a little bit of what you're asking?
That came up for me immediately when,
Sure.
When you said you were running these reports every year, it seemed to me like that would have come up previously, but I appreciate your time here.
Yes.
I guess my other question is I thought that the decision has not been made yet as to which roles at which schools are approved and which are not.
For PTA?
Oh, no, we're talking about, like,
Sorry.
about the district, is it still in the process of reviewing the positions that have been,
Well, I've asked them to go back and look again at, I don't want to do a one size fits all. I want every single school to, like, okay, at this school, let's say PTA was funding 3 positions. And which ones do we have data that say, yes, this is the same standard we're using everywhere? And so there were some schools that had like a STEM focus. There was a school that had Project Lead the Way. So where there was an alignment or rationale that would not, in my opinion, meaning we do have that in other parts of our district, both affluent and non-affluent, then that's not an equity issue. But if we have, for instance, we have a lot of kids that need dyslexia. Okay, then let's look at the numbers. Well, if the campus didn't submit those students for screening and those students didn't get identified, I'm gonna have to have some other conversations, because there were some campuses that the principal identified, screened, and they're like, here are the kids that we need. This is why PTA's been paying for like an interventionist. And it's like, yep, you've got 78 kids. You had only had 1 dyslexia interventionist. You're getting a second one. So like in some instances, it's even more than what the PTA was paying, because they were paying for a 0.5. And it's like, no, you all need a full-time person there, and we should have been paying for that. And so there are a lot of, and that's what I'm saying, there are a lot of moving parts, and I don't want to just like, no, that's it, it's no, and it's no. I want to look at the data, and where we can, like if we can get to a yes, I want to get to a yes. And I want the district to be responsible for the core mission of funding positions. That's our job. So that PTA can utilize their funds to do some other things, not to fund the job that is really primarily ours. And you had a question, and then you had a question, and then you had a question, and then you had a question. So I got 4. I got my teacher eyes going.
You've actually answered most of what I was going to ask, because our school, one of it was a dyslexia specialist, a CALT specialist, and so it took a while for us to figure out what was the number of students indicated to as a person, but it's one in like 36, 38.
36 to 38.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so that was my biggest fear with our PTA, is losing that thing, because I really felt like, from what I had gathered, that our school needed it. It wasn't just.
And
But I think you've commented to it,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, so similar, kind of more speaking about the data of like, so are the guidelines out there for, like, are they transparent and public to know?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. The dyslexia one, we just came up with that because there wasn't one in our district. We were just like, principals would say, we need one, and they would give them. So now the team has actually said 36 to 38 gets one, and then if you're significantly, somewhere over that, then we're gonna get a full-time second one, or we have some central office dyslexia specialists. Like if you're 2 or 4 kids over, it's not enough to justify a full teacher, but we could at that point then have what we'll call itinerant support that would come in to be assigned the additional like 2 or 4 students, so that they would get the same services that other students were getting. So that's the part that's gonna, and then we also have this idea of, we also have to anticipate statistically what percentage of kids that have not been identified yet may be identified, because we kind of know in general, you kind of have an idea. So we're trying to incorporate that as well.
Okay, and I guess are the guidelines, not just for dyslexia, but for other positions, they're in line with other Texas districts?
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
I mean,
okay.
yeah, you can compare them, and Leslie, we can put like that link up that has and so like just in a nutshell though, for instance, the guidelines were 29 to 1 at secondary schools. We lowered it to 28 to 1. Our counselor ratio was 450 to 1. We lowered that to
350 to 1 at secondary.
350 to 1 at secondary. And the way I did that, because again, we're not getting any more funds, but even though we've had a loss in enrollment, which would have meant if you're keeping the 450 to 1 for counselors at secondary, well then we would be saying we're gonna lose these counselors. I said, no, let's keep all the counselors, let's lower the ratio, and we'll figure out how we're gonna make that work. Because we know counseling, particularly given where we are now, like, that's a really important issue. So while we made adjustments in other areas, we did not. We kept the counselors. But yes, they're available and you can compare them. Most school districts have them. Either you can find it at usually their budget meeting in June and some of them may have it in a handbook, but Leslie will send you ours, and then if there's someone in particular, I'm sure we could give you a link so you could find like who you would want to compare it to.
Yeah, and I just had 2 other quick questions. So this 17.2, I know not all will necessarily be district funded. Is that for the upcoming school year?
Yes.
Okay. And then there was this question about tutors. So I heard that, let's say, there's a position at our school that doesn't get funded. Well, we can use PTA funds to then hire tutors for after school. But then on the family newsletter, there was a line about something about tutors not being funded.
No.
Can you clarify?
Yeah, let me clarify that. Anything that would be, let's say we can't come to consensus on anything that isn't being done across the board customarily, but we want to do tutoring at a school, as long as that's done before or after school, that can still be done utilizing PTA funds. That would not be the same thing as paying the core mission because comparability is not going to look at tutors after school.
Okay.
It's only going to look at the positions that we're utilizing during the school day. And so we need to find out, though, where you read that so that Dr. Mays, you're making a notation so we can go and find out what we can clarify on that.
Thank you.
Then over here, and then we'll go back over there.
I'm curious. I have two questions. The equity versus the abrupt decision to have the PTA not fund positions. We're basically losing our teeth. We told them, hey, you've got your position for next year, and then 1 week later we're telling them that they don't have a position. If there is a methodical approach to this, then why is such an abrupt decision to be a hard decision on pushing forward this for next year's budget?
Yeah, well, I mean, we really shouldn't have been doing it. and we have been doing it for a long time. And so it's one of those that if we extend it a year, then we extend it another year, and then we extend it, like,
But
it's been.
aren't you all trying to still figure out some stuff? Like,
Well, because some of them we may be able, that's why I'm saying, it's not none of these are gonna be funded. It's which ones can I look at data that says we are being equitable. And in fact, there are many of these that we're going to be able to do that. But any of the, positions, again, no one in our district is guaranteed a particular campus. If it's about our kids and their needs, we absolutely will work with them to make sure they have a job. I don't want anyone not to have a job because of this decision in any way, but I can't guarantee that it's going to be at that school.
I have to say, one of those rare unicorns that grew up here in Austin, I went to Josephine Houston Elementary School, which is less than 2 miles from here. Was moved all around. I also was bused from one end of Austin to the other. I'm wondering if that, I'm just trying to grasp and think, was that part of an equity solution, and has that been discussed? Because I know now, Cassis has taken, with our numbers being down, I believe that we have taken on children from other areas as well, and it seems to be working out. Is that a conversation that could continue?
Well, I think we are going to have that conversation just in a big picture, because in West Austin, we tend to have more of what I'll call a vertical alignment in general. In East Austin, that doesn't exist. And the solution for those enrollments is we have to ensure that we have programs that kids from all over our district may want. And we need to provide the campuses with the resources to have real early college, high school programs. And I say real. Our campuses are doing the best they can, but they haven't been provided. Like, we don't have a dedicated, like, these 4 teachers are going to teach freshmen, 120 kids that are coming into an early college, high school. That's a high school, early college, high school model, where you have a school within a school, you've got a counselor, you've got an assistant principal, and you can have students that are leaving there with an associate's degree, 66 hours, can transfer to UT Austin, and in some instances get in easier than the top 6% because you're going in with college hours, which puts you in a whole other, but like, we haven't communicated that to anybody, right? So nobody even knows that from any part of our community that's available. Well, part of it is we can't communicate something that we actually haven't put the support in. So Dr. Mays, we hired Dr. Cresslin Fannin. I think she's working at graduation right now. But and her expertise is early college, high schools. And our entire purpose there is to ensure that we start to build these programs. Because at the end of the day, our parents are, and many of you may not be choosing your neighborhood school. You may be choosing something different, but we have to make sure we have programs throughout our district that people will want. And that's going to mean, instead of saying, oh, we're losing enrollment, everyone sometimes thinks about changing boundary lines. All that happens when you change boundary lines is everybody gets mad. Because you're going to try to force people to go someplace where they don't want to go. And in today's era, when I was in school, you could do that. You would we're going to change the boundary, and my parents are like, you've got to go to this school. That's no longer your school. We don't live in that world anymore. People choose with their feet, and parents are going to go wherever they think is best for their child, understandably. So I think we have to rethink more of an open enrollment kind of concept where you could still choose your neighborhood school. I don't want to take that away, but if you could add in that we would have seats available at other parts of our school and provide some transportation. Because if you don't provide transportation, then it's not a choice. And I don't even think that has anything to do with money. If you're like me, a full-time working parent, I wouldn't be able to drop off my kid across town, even if it was a great program or not, right? I mean, so I think transportation is, and we're trying that out in East Austin right now by expanding. Dr. Mays expanded instead of, the state, this is another one of those, they've reimbursed us the same amount for mileage and transportation, the same amount for more than 20 years. It's the same dollar amount, and you're only reimbursed for moving kids that live outside of a 2-mile radius. So if we drive by an apartment complex that's within the 2-mile radius and there's room on the bus and we stop and pick up the children, they will not reimburse us for taking those children to school. We're going to do it anyway in some areas because I see that as an investment of working to try to recoup some of our parents. And many of our parents in East Austin told us the reason they're picking charters is because of transportation, because charters then get what's called a small district allotment. So they're treated as if they're a small district, which was created for rurals. And so they actually get more dollars per kid than we do. And so that's like another part of that whole conversation, because most people don't know that charters are actually getting more dollars and aren't held to the same standard. For instance, they don't have to pay teachers salaries that we pay. Now, we wouldn't want to change our salaries, don't get me wrong, but they're able to use then those dollars to do other things because they don't have to meet the state standard of teacher salaries. So it's again, I think something that needs to be visionary. We need to think about, where we can create. We've got Samsung wants to partner with us. Dell Medical School wants to get really partnered with us, not just doing CNAs. We need to be lining kids up for RNs, for their bachelor's degree, to go to medical school, and they want to do that, but they only want to do that if we're actually going to have the supports in place, right? Like, you have to have dedicated staff that are going to be specifically focusing on these programs. So I think we're headed there, but again, trying to manage expectations and not overpromise. We're just starting on that era. And I just think there were so many other things that happened with COVID that had we not had COVID, we probably would have managed some of these. I would have probably managed some of these things much better. It's been very challenging year for all of you. It's been a very challenging year for all of our teachers. It's been a very challenging year for our principals, and it's been a very challenging year for me too. I'm working really hard for people not to be upset. I promise you, I don't want the people who are helping us so much to be upset. And if I could, go back in time again, I would. But I think there are some opportunities for us to do that. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so for the comparability formulas, is it based on the number of staff on a campus, even custodians that might not really be interacting with the child and providing any educational support? I know they do a lot on the campus, but how is that ratio? And is it, my understanding was it was the whole district they looked at, like staffing across the district, not campuses.
No, it's at a campus level. George, can you speak a little bit to that comparability report?
Yeah, it compares Title I, or campuses that receive Title I funding against campuses that do not.
Okay.
Which test do we use?
We use A.
And then, so is it just number of staff on campus, not so much classroom teachers ratio?
So when we use what he just asked the question on, that's what I was explaining. Sometimes you can actually use whichever one is going to benefit the district.
Okay.
So if you use A, which is what we've been using, we're just using dollars. We're not using FTEs. But the reason you want to have FTEs as an option is, again, that explanation again, because you could have salaries inflating when in fact you don't have more staff. And so if it wasn't comparable utilizing A, then we could use B and run those reports to see if we could still meet comparability.
Okay, and then my other question was I feel like I've looked at a list of, which was from last school year, the PTA funded positions across the district, and my understanding is I think they were mostly at elementary level, and the majority of them, if a campus was to fund a position, it was a reading specialist. It seemed like that was, and I don't know about all the PTAs represented here. I know at our school that was something we funded, a part-time reading specialist. How is the district, knowing that there's this humongous backlog of diagnostic, of kids who have not been diagnosed, they might have been screened and identified, and it doesn't seem like they will be diagnosed. I think it's their $600 or $800 student backlog. They're not going to be identified by September, but yet, so I don't know when they will meet criteria of being, determined if they're dyslexic or not. What are you going to do about those kids to prevent them from falling through the crack? Will they wait for the district to fix itself? You know what I mean? So I feel like we were some of the positions we were funding we're seeing those students that had been identified, you know, a screener identified that they needed further testing, and our reading specialists would see them. It wasn't the CALT that the district was paying for on our campus, but it was that, you know, a reading specialist to help prevent them from falling through the cracks. I mean, it's just that it's so hard because it's so crucial this time. I'm a neuropsychologist who works with adults, but I know the impact of like kind of not capturing a problem when it exists. And elementary school is this real short period, and these kids that fall behind continue to fall behind, you know, and then it affects self-esteem and, you know, like if they like school and want to go to school and all that. So I'm just, what is the district doing while they have this huge backlog to kind of, if you're going to take away the reading specialists paid for by PTAs, how are we going to help those kids?
So I do have Dr. Desiree Edwards here, and she's got, I meet with her every week, and we found a lot of information. Wave, Desiree. We've already discovered that of all of the referrals that we had, some of them were duplicates. So the original number, for instance, of 900 is actually not 900, but we didn't know that at the time because Desiree had just gotten here. Dr. Edwards, do you want to add anything as to what your goal is? And I know we had just met and you had just given me an update. If you want to share, go ahead and share with the team.
By June 30th, we will have the entire backlog caught up, and maybe even before June 30th. We have partnered with a major vendor here in the state, and they've given me permission to say the name, with Ames. And so they've provided us over 100 evaluators that we are sending through. And all the students who have been referred, parents have been contacted, and those students have had their evaluation scheduled.
And I think she's going to meet the June 30th. I think she's going to beat it, but I gave them a June 30th because I said we had to have them because we do need to know if we, and so all of that to say, so the reason that was important is we can hire more in the summer. I won't be able to hire more. I mean, yes, we can in September, but we're all sitting here knowing we're not going to have a pool to hire from in September. So that's why it was critical to see where we are. And in mid-June, in the next 2 weeks, we're actually going to see where are we in terms of the ones that have already been completed. So that if we need to, will I dip into fund balance to make sure we have those positions? Absolutely. The student needs have to be there. What I have to be cautious of is when we say these kids are waiting and they need help, I have to be able to do that across our entire district. And that's the challenge that I have. And I would love to partner and figure out how can we do that so that we do have the same standard, because that exists everywhere. And I have to be able to say we're doing that across our district based on that same standard at all our elementaries. And yes, our reconciliation is that all of the positions that we're talking about are all elementary. We didn't have any at the secondary level.
Would it be possible for PTAs to, partner with other schools? And Shannon and I actually met with Michelle Wallace prior to all this happening with the Austin Ed Fund just to talk about how much our PTA, funds. Our parents are very generous and families are generous, and I think a lot of families would give even more knowing that it helped people outside of our community. And that's kind of, I guess, the story that we want to tell because, but again, we haven't been part of the conversation.
This isn't about keeping it all for us.
Right.
Yeah,
No, and none of your actions have ever indicated to me that they've been just for you all. This was more of my observation, honestly, that I feel that we have been pressuring you all to pay for some positions that, again, we should be paying for, and not having necessarily all of the data saying, we need you to pay for this, and not necessarily anybody overseeing whatever we were asking for, and that we needed to be consistent with that. But one of your other parents from our Zoom meeting this morning also brought that up, and actually that's something Leslie had researched in some other school districts that actually had gotten into some trouble on officially not been able to meet comparability. I think I'm going to say it wrong. It's either Portland or Seattle or someplace. And they did sister schools as part of some of the strategies. And so if we work through the numbers with George and we're able to look at a school that maybe has very high, because if you're talking about the schools that are like in the 40 or 50% economically disadvantaged, I don't think we're going to have like tremendous issues. I think it's when you get to campuses where we have 90, 92, 94, 96% economically disadvantaged students that we have to be really careful. But if that's something that like a Cassis would adopt, a sister school, and we work together so that it's something that's manageable. It's not Cassis's responsibility either, or Briker Woods, or Highland Park, or Summit. I'm trying to think of all the names that I saw on my list. It's not any of your all's responsibility to do that. I hope I'm saying that enough that you all, I want us to do what we are supposed to be doing. But if we did that, if we just found even one
very basic question that I wasn't able to find the answer to before we came today, and that is, are we certain that PTA funds or booster club funds are included in the definition of local expenditures in Title I?
So it depends on where you put the dollars.
Okay.
If you don't put them in your general operating fund, then no, they wouldn't. The
And
challenge is that what the federal government will think of as general operating. And we're still researching that ourselves. In general, if there's a separate account, like I've heard them frown upon it. I haven't seen necessarily anything physically done, but I've also not seen most districts do put those dollars into their general operating account. If it's in the general operating account, it absolutely will be part of comparability.
Okay. Because as I understand it, and again, this is just as somebody who tried to learn this in the past day, but the purpose of Title I is to give extra money to economically disadvantaged schools, right? And so our concern, or the district's concern, is that if we're spending too much in local dollars at non-Title I schools, that might result in, as we bring that up when it's compared to what we're spending at Title I schools, we're suddenly not spending extra money on the Title I schools. We're spending the same amount of money. Is that like generally the problem?
Absolutely. Yeah, you're supposed to take your 199 funds and, okay, here's what you get. And then title is supposed to say, because the research is clear, poverty affects academic success, right? So using that, the federal government said, we're going to give you additional money for schools where percentages, because there is a difference, and there's an argument to be made in this other area too. I may not have a percentage high enough, but I may have a total number of schools. Let's take Anderson High School as an example. They have the same number of students that are classified as economically disadvantaged as all of East Side Memorial Early College High School, right? And so, but the feds use the research that says when you have homogeneous grouping of poverty, you have a much bigger hurdle to climb than if you have a large number, but they're mixed in. That's the whole idea of diversity in economics, right? That when poor kids are with non-poor kids, everybody does better. And so with that though, yes, the idea is you take your general operating and you give X, and then federal money is supposed to come to provide, you got to give more where you need more, to make it simplistic. So yes, sir, that would be the way I see it, and that's the way that I think George would agree.
And so when you're looking at the comparability, then you have the district has the opportunity to choose, but we were just talking about one of three tests. Was there an effort here to see if we could fit into comparability or meet those standards using one of the other tests before these positions were eliminated?
No, I didn't, because I think just in general, I would be disingenuous if I didn't just say, I don't think it's a good practice. So no, sir. I mean, in all fairness to your question, no, sir. We did not do that. And I think the other challenge is we actually won't be able to do any of that until the October PEAMS date when our official enrollment comes in. and I think previous years, we probably could have done an estimate right now. I would say this year, I have no idea. And then with the virtual bill dead, that means we won't even be able to offer virtual and get any funding. They were doing the one that were going to give us, like, you could do 10% of your population could receive virtual instruction, and we would have created that with just teachers doing just that, so we don't have teachers trying to do both. But that bill died, and unless the governor puts it on, that means we wouldn't even be able to offer that. Why is that a big deal? Charter schools are going to be able to offer some virtual things that we haven't been able to by law. And I don't know if that means we're going to have a whole bunch of people that are going to choose not to come back in person. So I think in any other year, I would probably feel more confident. My biggest concern is I have no idea what's showing up.
May I make one more observation? Just to echo a few things that I've heard here today, we heard about that COVID was a tough year for everyone. Certainly was for our educators, for the district. Those are some really insurmountable issues that you guys face. And thank you for your frankness in your answer to that last question. I appreciate that.
You won't trust me if I lie.
It's true, and again, I appreciate it. So I think what hasn't quite been articulated here, but what I've heard speaking with our parents is that at our campus, we lost a lot of families over the course of this year. Like Melanie said, we were down 22%. And there are a lot of parents who have been champions of public schools who've chosen, including my family, all the families you see sitting here, who've chosen to remain, who may have the means to send their children elsewhere, but we're committed to our neighborhood schools and committed to the district and committed to the success of these kids. And when this decision came down in this kind of ham-handed way, it really put a lot of us back on our heels. So I think that's a lot of the blowback that you've received is based on that. So I think just the observation is if everything was so tough this year, why not walk this decision back a year? I know you already said if we do that, then we have to do it another year, then we have to do it another year. To look at opportunities for partnership, to look at opportunities of diversity, of economics, and those kind of theories, and see what we could do together. Because you see 17 FTEs, 27 people, 5 teachers at Cassis, but out of over 5,000 positions. It's just, this seems sort of like a ready, shoot, aim kind of situation. And what I'm afraid that's going to happen, Dr. Elzaldi, is you're eliminating $1 million that's coming into the district to pay for students to help teachers. Pay for teachers to help students, but that's not going anywhere else. You're just squashing that and getting rid of it. And the danger is that you're going to end up alienating or running off people that could be some really tremendous allies for the district. So I think everybody in this room would be interested in helping, trying to find a solution here if we were invited to the table. I honestly do. So sorry, I've spoken for way too long today, but that's just an observation that I had to try and articulate for some of the folks that I've spoken to.
I don't disagree with your perspective at all, okay? I hope we don't end up with, like, this is the right way and this is the wrong way. I think we need to move away from binary thinking. However, again, I don't think it's fair either to not recognize that there are many of these we're picking up, including those that folks were even utilizing, like I said, some title dollars to pay for those assistant. We did that across the district with the assistant principals. And so I don't see this as necessarily, or rather I'm asking that we look at the entire picture, not just these positions and what we did do as a district, and that some of these will be funded by the district. I cannot honestly feel like it's an equitable practice when we have different definitions for what the intervention definition was. And I think In most of our cases, and I think there's a lot to be said with us, the devil's in the details. If we can actually demonstrate, here's what the need was and here's what the district's going to pick up, I think it'll make a big difference. And I think, honestly, there's some additional kind of challenges at CASIS that don't have anything to do with you all, that have to do with some of the data collection that our team was doing with regard to where are the students, how have they been screened, and where's the data, and how are we serving those students? And not all of those questions, frankly, could be answered. So what I would ask is, particularly with CASIS, it's true with everyone, but certainly with CASIS, that we would want our team to continue to visit with you all and with our principal to see what exactly can we do. I do think there's something we can do. I had already talked to our team as we looked at it. I looked at the whole thing that they did, and every single campus we were able to find, this school gets this school will get this school will get, it wasn't a one-to-one. And at CASIS, quite frankly, the data wasn't there to support what we were being told by our principal of what the needs were. And every other school was able to give us that support in terms of the rationale for the positions. But that being said, I had talked to our team and I said, now we end up with CASIS not getting anything and everybody else got something. And just the optics on that isn't good. It doesn't make anybody feel good, and certainly myself either. So Dr. Mays, what did I tell you that we were going to look at?
We were going to look at the Spanish program again after school, but we did sit down and talk with Principal Tennant about the data for those students that needed the reading support. And we did talk about revisiting that data this summer because he did recognize that there was a gap in between the number that we had on the snapshot date when we were staffing for this position and what he felt like he actually had on the campus. And so we discussed that process that he needed to follow for us to be able to capture that data, for their team to be able to staff those campuses with the support that they needed. And we did agree to revisit that number. I'm not sure the date this summer, but we did say we'll revisit the number then.
Yes,
I
ma'am.
just wanted a clarification on the timeline, so just so I understand and fully know what's going on. I understand 5 positions were already approved because of the different setups for am I correct? There were like 5 positions. They were like technology specialists, and they were within programs that were already had defined parameters.
I don't know that it was 5. I know that, like, for instance, I think the ones I remember here were like Matthews, Baranoff, and Davis.
Oh.
Those 3
Right.
had a position that the data was like, okay, yep, I see it. So, okay, PTA, you don't have to fund this. The district is going to pick it up.
So those 3 were already identified.
Correct.
Sorry if I got 5, but I've been reading a lot of stuff lately. It's been crazy work too. So those positions have already been identified, and I understand through the course of this next week, there's going to be determinations on the applications based on data that each principal has provided. Is that correct?
So what I'm trying to match up is what PTA was funding with what the school said they were funding,
Okay.
with what we have verification through payroll that we've paid for the same position, to match it up to what we've done as a district. So in an example, and probably the cleanest example that I can give across the board, is Bryker Woods. Bryker Woods has been paying for a .50 AP.
Okay.
So I know what that amount that we've paid out is, and then I know in our staffing guidelines that we have now allocated a 1.0 AP to Bryker Woods. So there's no need for Bryker Woods PTA to pay for that. So I'm trying to make sure that we match up positions to what we've paid, because like a school will say, oh, that's a .40, but when we go look, it's not, and it's kind of like been all over the board. So that's what we're trying to match up to see what we've done as a district. What is that balance at each school?
Okay, and that is, the determination is being made potentially at the end of this week.
Yeah.
Is that
Correct.
And then announcements will be made to all the schools of which positions that were PTA funded or now going to be funded by the district.
Yeah, and what that balance
And then there's
is.
going to be the assessments throughout the duration of June, where you're also gonna be seeing if there's a change in need for each school. And then you're gonna be circling back on staff, is that correct?
Absolutely.
And potentially reading specialists at the
Could
end
be.
of this week.
Could
Sorry,
be.
your position is no longer funded at the school, but then you might have the determination at the end of June that
Could be.
position actually is necessary.
It could be.
Okay.
Could be.
I was gonna also say, communication-wise, we had the same kind of reason in the letter, you know, and we were kind of curious about, like, what is the best route? I mean, we sent it through the Let's Talk, and I think, you know, we got our kind of like, you know, feedback from Gillette, but like, what's the best route for us to collectively communicate back and forth with the district in order to like support and like get together on the same page? Is that still the best route of communication?
Well, I think this was an unusual situation where there were a whole lot of emails.
I don't expect you to personally answer.
Well, I really tried to, I really do, but this was something that was just, it was more than I could, and I was, my anticipation, or my expectation rather, was that Dr. Mays was meeting with the PTAs, and honestly, that each of the principals, it's not like we didn't have these conversations with our principals, okay? And so some of this also is just kind of, it's all of us learning how to build a team and how to work together, and having, in some instances, yes, some different expectations. And that's why, I mean, that's why I elected to just let me make some time in between these graduations, and I am going to have to wrap this up. Well, I should do it. I also don't, you know, like, I don't want to be the villain, guys, and I also don't expect you to be like, oh, it's fantastic. Like, it's neither of those, right? Like, and 100%, and that's why it's like, no, I need to make time, and I didn't want it to like go into next week, and it's like, we'll just make it happen in between, and let's make 2 different opportunities so that whoever can attend, and then we can regroup. So what I would ask is that we start with finalizing where we are this week on those positions, and then I think the best way would be to communicate directly with Dr. Mays in an email to him, and then if it gets like there's too many, then Dr. Mays can come to me and we can figure out how to. But I think what I also heard is we have an opportunity here also to like learn. I have an opportunity to learn from this, and then we can move forward with what our common goals are, our common ground is, and how we can move forward. And again, the goal here is to get to a yes. If I can get to a yes and also feel like we are continuing to live equity throughout our district, then, and I think it's possible. I don't think it's not possible, but I think some schools had done a really good job. I mean, when we would say, well, Principal Drummond, can you show us X, Y, yep, here are my kids, here's who's been, here's here, oh, yep, you've got this many kids, okay, then you need an additional. And it wasn't like that everywhere. It wasn't like that everywhere. And so the challenges are, I'm working with the data that our principals are providing. But we're going to support them in making sure that we stay up with those that are being assessed, because we do want to make sure we're meeting all of those needs. So it is fluid. We'll have some information, the latest early next week, that we'll send out to everybody. And then I think we want to start setting up some opportunities to meet and partner and think through some pieces. And I think as each of our executive directors work with their principals, we can set up some smaller meetings with each campus so that we can specifically talk about each individual school and walk through each school's process. So I think that might be of some assistance as well, to look at exactly each school, because they are different. And I never want to get to everybody's going to get the exact same thing. That would be absolutely contrary to equity, as some of you wrote to me, and I agree 100%.
Is this something we can get on the calendar for the next board meeting in June? Will this be up for discussion? I'm talking about collaborating together and trying to, find a solution.
I think we've already missed the deadline for the June information session, because we now post those, and all of those agenda items I think went to the board members Friday. They went Friday. I can see if that could be something we might be able to put on for the voting meeting as a discussion item. Tony, if you'll just make a note of that, and I can get with Jacob, and maybe we can have it as a discussion item for the would that be the 24th? I think so. Let me see if we can get that on the voting meeting.
Okay. And just to clarify, I'm sorry, one more question, just for the sake of our teachers that are still kind of in limbo. You're saying there's still a possibility this week that some of those positions are still a little bit fluid? Dr. Mays, is that what you were saying?
So my understanding is that all the teachers, everyone that's impacted should have received communication already at this point.
We're just trying to match up to make sure that we captured all the PTA paid and then what we've done as a district to date. Now, in a case where, like, if the data changes over the summer and we add one more dyslexia interventionist, then that would change, you know, the balance on that particular school.
And then he would go interview and hire for that additional position that he picks up. But in terms of anybody that's impacted, they've already been communicated
Yeah.
with and been placed in our priority pool to be able to interview for the other vacancies that we have.
Yeah.
So there would maybe, even if a spot opened up on a campus where, you know, you guys reassessed and decided, oh, the district will fund this, that person who was previously filling it could be somewhere else. And you wouldn't have the continuity of that person returning to their role. It would be a new person.
That is correct.
Yep.
And there's no chance of this getting walked back a year
No,
at this
sir.
point, this decision, in
No,
spite of with that amendment that was put on the.
No, sir, I'll
On the
follow the
funding
law.
bill.
I'm going to follow the law. I will always follow the law. And it doesn't go into effect until September. Staffing will already have been done for this school year. But, you know, we'll make the adjustments that are necessary if we're forced to utilize PTA funds for positions. You know, it's for the position. It's not for a person. And so we, you know, again, our intent here is to work with what we have and do the very best we can with what we have. But I won't break the law. I'm not going to put on stripes or orange. So we'll follow it whether I agree or disagree with it. I can take one more, and I'm sorry, but it's 6 o'clock and I've got a
I
graduation.
just had one more thing. I appreciate your time today, and I think a lot of us came to the PTA and worked really hard for our school because we want all of the kids in the district to be able to have access to what they need to. I think there's been a lot of mixed messaging that has come out as far as our budget is concerned. And I think a lot of the PTAs felt like they were filling the gap because constant communication from the district has been that we do not have enough money and that we are not going to, I mean, you said in the beginning of the meeting that your budget already is
$38 million.
Yeah, and so I think that's just a little mixed messaging as far as what you're putting out there.
Well, I guess it's just being over budget has more to do with the fact that we have too many staff members. And so having PTA fund staff isn't an alignment. It's not about we need more money. It's that we're spending more than what we take in. And that's about how we need to ensure that we're staffing our campuses and central office in the way in which maximizes the dollars at a campus level, not at a central office level. But I certainly understand your observation.
Mine's
Yes, ma'am.
maybe for Dr. Mays. So beyond the reading specialist and the call, I understand that, but some programs, some schools have a innovation coach or a language component. So are you looking at that across the schools too, to be like, well, some schools do have that, so we will fund that, or is it just?
We did evaluate all of those as a team. We sat down and we'll continue to look at those individual campus programs, and that's how we ended up with
Matthews, Davis,
and
Baranoff.
because of the program implications. And so we are doing that across the campuses that are impacted, in addition to, like you said, the reading specialists and those positions.
Can you share with us what made you decide to give one school an innovation specialist and not another? I mean, it doesn't have to be right now, you can send it to us, but.
Yeah, I think at that level, it would be best if we could visit with each of you on that specific campus, and then we can do like a complete listing of everything that was done and maybe even identify like the data that was used. for that decision-making. So it'll also still be transparent to everyone, but we can have those individually. We are going to need to go because we've got to get to graduation. But any other questions that we did not get to that you would like, please send them to Tony, wave Tony over there, and that's T-O-N-I, Tony, T-O-N-I, Cordova, C-O-R-D-O-V-A, Tony.Cordova, I missed the dot, sorry, Tony.Cordova at austinisd.org. Toni.Cordova at austinisd.org. And we'll work to get responses and then collect them so that it won't just be like one person seeing whatever they ask. And then we'll continue to work on each individual school, and our goal will be to make sure that we can communicate that by Monday at the latest, and then we'll visit with our individual campuses. And I am indebted to all of the work that all of you all have done for our schools. PTAs are a huge positive impact on our campuses, and at no time did I want anything negative. And again, I am deeply, deeply sorry for any miscommunication that caused any hurt to any of you, to anyone you know that gives so much of their time and their treasure to our schools. And I hope that this is something we can still move forward with. And I think if we focus on our commonalities, we can move together in a way that can, maybe one day we'll look back and it'll be something that maybe I'll be able to look back on this and see this as one of those things I was supposed to learn something from. We're indebted to you all, and I thank you all for taking the time to come out. And I do look forward to maybe having some small group town hall meetings that we can just that you all can get to know me a little bit better, and I can get to know you all a little bit better. Okay. Thank you all so much. Be safe.
Thank you.